So my name is Klaus Buchenau. I'm a member of the steering board of the Sophia project, within which this series of talks is happening. And I was asked to take over the moderation today. And just to quickly introduce the two speakers we have today, they both have to do with Romania, and I think that we start with Petru Negura, and after that we hear Nicolae Drăgușin. Petru Negura has been until recently, until the end of March, the Humboldt Fellow at the IOS, and he is originally from the Free International University of Moldova in Chișinău. And what he's going to talk about here is basically his Humboldt project, which is about the schooling system in these border areas of the Soviet Union, of Romania and of Poland, where each of these states tried to nationalize the local population. And I think this will be a very interesting talk. And the next afterwards is going to be Nicolae Drăgușin, who is a researcher at the Elie Wiesel National Institute for the Studies of the Holocaust in Romania. And currently he is a fellow at the Center of Advanced Studies in Sofia, which is a partner within the Sophia project. And Nicolae's interests are, well, he has a background in political science and in philosophy, while Petru is a historian. And the research interests of Nicolae are Jewish-Christian relations in Romania and Eastern Europe, church-state relations in Romania and Eastern Europe, both with a focus on 20th century or early 20th century, and also the citizenship question in Romania. So while Petru's theme is going to be about 3 countries, Nicolae is going to concentrate on interwar Romania, and particularly on the question of the Concordat between Romania and the Holy See, something we know also from other Orthodox countries. When they make a Concordat with the Vatican, it's always highly contested. In Yugoslavia, this resulted eventually in violence, even in the alleged murder of the patriarch. But this is not what we're going to talk about today. So this was quickly like on both speakers. And now my presentation of you two has ended, and I ask Petru to start with his presentation.
Well, so the topic of my presentation today is about popular resistance to linguistic assimilation in the Romanian, Polish, and Soviet borderlands between the two world wars. So this is attempt and essay to making a comparison between these cases, but focusing on the border regions in each of these countries. So the plan of my presentation. So first I will speak about the state language policies toward ethnic and linguistic minorities in Romania, Poland, and the USSR. Then I will switch to especially to minority groups and how they will apply different strategies of resistance to linguistic assimilations basically through schooling. And then I will speak about how so-called titular groups resisted to language assimilation basically through schooling. And in the end, I will share some conclusions. So I'm speaking about the border regions. So well, I'm sorry, yeah. So when I say border regions, so I mean foremost Bessarabia and Transnistria. So these are quasi symmetrical, so to say, cases. So one is in Romania and another one in the Soviet Union within the Ukrainian SSR, Ukrainian Republic. Then I will shortly discuss the Eastern Galicia, so actually the eastern regions from Poland in the interwar period, and accordingly the asymmetrical cases in the Ukrainian SSR and a little bit Belarusian SSR. So yeah. I'll read my presentation because I really sometimes have troubles with time management in my presentation, so I will stick to my paper. Most studies on the policies of linguistic assimilation in Eastern Europe in the 19th and 20th century, such as Russification or Polonization, gloss over some aspects that I consider essential for understanding the processes of nationalization and the forms of resistance to them on which this paper is focusing. First, as it is quite well known, before the implementation of large-scale language assimilation policies, scholars and literati participated in an extensive process of codification, normalization, and standardization of national languages. This has led to an even greater effort on the part of ethnic minorities to learn the national language and the various dialects of the national language with which they were in contact, in addition to their own national language, which had also been standardized beforehand. And in the third point, at the same time, ethnic groups considered to be titular have been forced through schooling and literacy to adopt the standard national language while self-restraining to speak regional languages in public spaces. As Tomasz Kamuzela argues, the nationalizing states of Central and Eastern Europe and the intellectual elites sought to achieve a normative isomorphism between language, nation, and state through linguistic standardization, homogenization, and dissemination of the national language through school education over the territory of the nation state and by the suppression of regional languages and dialects. However, many researchers overlook that the language homogenization and dissemination process has met resistance from both the minority population and the titular ethnic groups. In the next few minutes, I will briefly discuss some cases of popular resistance to the policies of linguistic homogenization and assimilation in the border regions of Romania, Poland, and the USSR after the end of World War I until the beginning of World War II. Nation states have applied differentiated strategies to integrate or marginalize groups considered to be minorities, based on the perceptions applied by intellectual elites and state authorities in Bulgaria and Greece towards the ethnic identity of Muslims, basically Turks and Pomaks in the 20th century. Ulstrumbauer distinguishes three types of perceptions that gave rise to distinct policies. First, non-tolerance was applied to groups considered fundamentally different from the titular one, not only ethnically, but also religiously. These groups were subjected to institutionalized discrimination and ultimately to ethnic cleansing. Two, the second strategy is acceptance was aimed at integrating minority groups or conversely neglecting them. Three, denial of otherness took place by perceiving and defining minority groups as part of the titular ethnic group. Having been considered denationalized in the past, these communities have been subject to intense linguistic and cultural, sometimes also religious assimilation. Rogers Brubaker distinguishes between assimilationist and dissimulationist policies towards ethno-linguistic minorities. Assimilationist policies were applied to ethnic groups considered assimilable, interwar Polish and Romanian state authorities, and nationalist intellectuals considered Ukrainians or Ruthenians and Belarusians assimilable minorities. In contrast, Germans, Hungarians, and Jews were considered non-assimilate, with the useful specification that Germans could not be assimilated because of their strong national identity, while assimilation of Jews was seen as undesirable and even harmful, as they would be too culturally and racially different to be integrated into the body of the nation. Ukrainians, Ruthenians, and Belarusians in Poland and Romania were, according to Brubaker, borderland minorities concentrated in the eastern regions of these states. At the same time, large populations in neighboring states, especially in the USSR, spoke dialectal versions of Ukrainian and Belarusian, and to whom Ukrainian and Belarusian nationalist intellectuals were building cross-border identity ties. Within these eastern border regions, especially in Eastern Galicia, Western Volhynia, Polesia, Northern Bukovina, and Southern and Northern Bessarabia, these minorities, often not recognized as such by national centers, did not form distinct national collectivities, sharing a clear identity, but were composed of a conglomerate of communities with regional dialects and identifications. Various intellectual elites and administrative authorities in Romania and Poland considered these borderland minorities Ruthenized Poles or Romanians. They therefore recommended that they be subjected to re-Romanization and re-Polonization measures, respectively. In Soviet Ukraine in the 1920s and 30s, certain families were considered to be made up of Russified Ukrainians, and thus were to be subjected to Ukrainization against their will. To make things even more complicated, the central authorities in Warsaw applied regionalization strategies by encouraging regional identities, such as that of the Hutsuls and Lemkos in Galicia and Transcarpathia, by supporting activities and periodicals in local dialects in order to alienate these communities from Ukrainian and nationalist movements in Eastern Galicia. Romania and Poland have pursued a consistent and assumed policy of linguistic assimilation, of Romanization and Polonization, respectively, of ethnic minorities, despite the 1919 minority treaties, in which these countries committed themselves to protect the rights of ethnic minorities. These policies varied in form and content between the different governments that alternated at the head of these countries. Thus, in Poland, the National Democratic Party of Poland, the so-called Inecja, established a policy of linguistic assimilation through education. At the same time, the Socialist Party, Sanacja, influenced educational policy towards greater civic integration. In practice, however, the difference between the two approaches was one of form rather than substance. Similarly, in Romania, despite periodic discussions between the two major parties, the National Liberal Party, PNL, and the National Peasant Party, PNC, Partidul Național Țărănist, Partidul Național Liberal, on state policy towards minorities, a nationalist consensus was widespread among Romanian political elites throughout the interwar period. Moreover, in Romania and Poland, assimilationist policies towards minorities intensified in the second half of the 1930s, paving the way for the widespread application of dissimulationist policies, especially towards Jews and Roma, but also towards Ukrainians, Poles, and Germans. The Second World War provided favorable circumstances for the large-scale materialization of these policies. For strategic reasons, in the 1920s and 30s, the Soviet Union built a nationality policy in quasi-symmetrical opposition to the policies applied in the nation states on east-western border. Immediately after establishing the Soviet Union in 1922, the Bolshevik government started nationalization policies in Soviet republics. Thus, in Soviet Ukraine, the Soviet authorities implemented an ambitious Ukrainization policy for all state institutions, from primary schools to the party central committee. At the same time, the policy of nativization, or in Russian, korenizatsiya, also translated by indigenization, was aimed at training and promoting professionals of native origin. Thus, in Ukraine, the Soviets created the Moldovan Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic, MASSR, in the Transnistrian region, Dnestrovia, on the border with Bessarabia and Romania. In 1925, a Polish autonomous region was formed in the Zhytomyr region. Moreover, the Republican authorities were tasked with creating a harmonious environment of inter-ethnic cohabitation and combating ethnic stereotypes, but also through measures of social and professional inclusion of representatives of all ethnic groups. However, Soviet nationality policy oscillated according to rivalries between various political factions within the party at the central and Republican levels. Thus, in the MSSR, in Soviet Transnistria, between 1924 and 1940, there were 4 radical reforms of the Moldovan language. The pendulum between language reforms described as Moldovanist and others as Romanianist prevented the smooth implementation of the Moldovanization policy in administrative and educational institutions. In 1938, while state institutions were cleansed of so-called enemies of the people selected on national criteria, for instance, Romanians, Poles, Germans, etc. So in the same time, Polish and German language schools were replaced by Russian and Ukrainian language schools. Dissimilationist policies soon followed assimilationist policies through the transfer and deportation of entire populations on ethnic grounds. Ethnic minorities were directly affected by assimilation policies in Romania and Poland in the 1920s and 30s. Some ethnic communities actively and passively resisted these policies. One of the most controversial issues in this context was the Polonization and Romanianization of minority language schools, or their conversion into bilingual schools. These measures of linguistic assimilation to schools have provoked constant protest from leaders of Ukrainian/Ruthenian communities in Volhynia, Galicia, Bukovina, and Bessarabia. Ukrainian or Ruthenian and Belarusian communities have also resisted passively by abstaining in large numbers from Polish and Romanian schools and even from bilingual schools, despite fines imposed for breaching the compulsory school education. According to documents in the 1920s and 30s, entire Ruthenian communities refused to send their children to Polish and Romanian schools. The non-attendance of Belarusian and Ukrainian children in border regions was blamed on the cultural backwardness of rural communities. In fact, several petitions from Ukrainian and Belarusian communities in these border provinces show that many Belarusian and Ruthenian families wanted schools in their mother tongue. Some rural communities could even contribute financially to open private schools in the mother tongue. Still, even private schools encountered bureaucratic obstacles and were forced to adopt a bilingual teaching format. Also, observers noticed that school attendance of Ukrainian and Belarusian children was higher in minority language schools than in monolingual Polish and Romanian schools. Researchers suggest that passive resistance at least, to colonization through education was stronger among Ukrainians in Eastern Galicia than among Ukrainians and Belarusians in Volhynia and Polesia. These regions, the last two regions, so Volhynia and Polesia, were part of the Russian Empire before the 1921 partition. According to some Polish state officials, the Galician Ukrainians had a stronger national consciousness. They experienced a vigorous national movement and at the same time an extensive school activity in the mother tongue in the Austrian Empire after 1873. In the Russian Empire, education in non-Russian languages was progressively suppressed in the second half of the 19th century, and national movements were strictly suppressed. According to some estimates, 40% of declared Belarusians preferred Belarusian language for public schools. The others would have chosen Polish language schools for pragmatic reasons to ensure their children's fluency in Polish to continue their secondary education while continuing to speak Belarusian at home. Also, several Ruthenian communities agreed that their children attend Polish or bilingual schools, so did not resist to assimilation through school. Jewish communities in Poland and Romania have petitioned for the opening of schools in Yiddish or Hebrew, accompanied by official protests by representatives of these communities in the two countries' legislative bodies. At the same time, research highlights the ability of Jewish communities to adapt to the dominant culture while maintaining their ethnic and religious identification. For example, despite pressure from Jewish nationalists, Jews in Bukovina were strongly Germanized. 55% of those who declared German as their primary language were Jewish, or 96% of all Jews. In Bessarabia and the Ukrainian regions of the Russian Empire, despite some voices advocating the affirmation of Jewish identity by cultivating a high culture in Yiddish or Hebrew, the silent majority of the Jewish population accepted Russian as the language for communication in the public sphere, and then after some resistance, Romanian language in the interwar period. Resistance to linguistic assimilation by ethnic minorities has been considered normal by observers of the time and by recent scholars. Conversely, resistance to nationalization by some communities within the titular nation has been regarded as an anomaly. Peter Judson and Tarazara have documented and analyzed cases of national indifference manifested by rural communities in Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia, in particular, their reluctance to send their children to a school taught in Czech or German, considered to be the mother tongue of these communities by the state school authorities in these disputed border regions. Well, in my paper and in my project, actually, I engage with this concept of national indifference by showing actually a greater agency of the rural communities in in the East European borderlands. So I'm trying to look at how people not only passively approached these policies, but also sometimes more or less actively resisted to them. In the following, I will present some cases where families and entire communities attributed to the titular nation in the border regions of Eastern Europe have boycotted primary school in the national language considered the mother tongue of these communities. In my previous research, I studied the response of the rural population of Bessarabia and Transnistria to Romanian and USSR mass schooling and other national building actions. I have shown that, to the regret and even irritation of the authorities of the respective states, Moldovan peasants disregarded in large numbers Romanian, called Moldovan in MSSR, primary schools. In Bessarabia, especially in the first years after the 1918 unification, some Moldovan and Ukrainian communities refused to send their children to Romanian schools because they did not consider Moldovan a language of perspective for their children and asked the authorities to reinstate teaching in Russian. Moldovan and Ukrainian peasants tacitly sabotaged Romanian schools. I quote the documents of the time while saying sabotaged Romanian schools by not attending them en masse. According to a survey initiated by the Romanian Ministry of Education, in the 1931-32 school year, only 53% of children were enrolled and 34% of all school-age children attended rural primary schools in Bessarabia. Also, an overwhelming proportion of children left school after primary school's first and second grades. When asked why they did not send their children to school, they cited material and economic reasons. They needed children in the household or had no money for clothes, books, and school supplies. Observers at the time also pointed to cultural reasons for truancy, namely the peasants' lack of interest in formal education. Others blamed the cultural backwardness of the Ruthenian peasants. Careful research into the phenomenon shows that massive school absenteeism went hand in hand with a strong perception of social and cultural otherness by Bessarabian, Moldovan, or Ukrainian peasants towards the school and the teacher being considered as a stranger in the village community. Mass absenteeism in rural areas was not an isolated case in the region at the time. In 1899, more than 33% of children in Galicia did not attend school, and absenteeism was highest in the southeastern districts, up to 50%. Despite Ukrainian and bilingual Polish and Ukrainian primary schools. School absenteeism remained high in the interwar period, although with a clear downward trend during the 1920s and 30s. Thus, in December 1925, in several districts of Eastern Galicia, the ratio of pupils enrolled to school-age children reached about 60%, while in other districts it exceeded 80%. In Volhynia, this proportion was even lower. In Soviet Ukraine, the policy of Ukrainization aimed, as in other Soviet republics, to restore social justice and bring the masses of Ukrainians, mostly peasants, closer to Soviet power. The official discourse associated Ukrainization with progress. However, this policy was perceived by many Ukrainians as abusive, sparking heated debates in the 1920s. Resistance to Ukrainization came from all walks of life, from peasants and rank-and-file workers to teachers and party cadres. Teachers believed that Ukrainization had contributed to a decline in education achievement. Residents of the eastern and southeastern areas, Donbass, Kherson, Odessa, showed the most intense resistance to Ukrainization. Young Ukrainian Komsomolites derided, ridiculized Ukrainization. Several parent groups lobbied the authorities to return schools to the Russian language. Parents preferred Russian language education for practical reasons, namely to give their children more secure chances of social mobility. In the mid-1920s, absenteeism in primary schools was as high as 50% in rural Ukraine. Following the amendment of the law on compulsory schooling in 1928 and under the pressure of the Cultural Revolution in 1928-31, school attendance reached 99% in 1930-31, according to official estimates. I remind that the Cultural Revolution in 28-31 was a high modernist campaign promoted by the Soviet states throughout the Soviet Union, but had also very specific repressive features, namely collectivization, decolonization, and deportation of whole groups, also at the elite levels, but mostly in the popular strata. So the success of Ukrainization was thus linked to high school to higher school enrollment rates. However, resistance to Ukrainization in schools and other institutions continued in various forms. From the mid-1930s onwards, the Central Soviet and Republican authorities took some steps backwards in the Ukrainization campaign, condemning the alleged excesses committed by the People's Commissariat for Education and the Central Committee of the Ukrainian Party. The most active supporters of Ukrainization were accused of nationalism and were purged starting in 1933. Similarly, in the Moldovan Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic, middle-rank officials, farmers, and ordinary workers resisted the Moldavanization policy. In 1926-27, 47% of all school-age children attended school. The others not. During the 1920s, Moldovan and Ukrainian children were fewer in school education than other ethnic groups like Russians, Germans, Jews, Bulgarians, Czechs. As in other Ukrainian regions, primary education covered the entire population of school-age children in 1930-31. However, manifestations of passive resistance to schooling continued, albeit to a lesser extent, throughout the 1930s, mainly through irregular attendance and dropout. The response of Jewish communities in Soviet Ukraine and the Moldovan Autonomous Republic to Yiddish language schooling as part of the so-called Jewishization policy is a revealing case in this context. Despite the good intentions of the Soviet authorities, many parents of Jewish nationality disagreed with the decision to assign Jewish children exclusively to Yiddish language schools, even though they had no doubts about their Jewish identity. As with the resistance to Ukrainian language schooling, parents perceived the policy as temporary and opposed it for pragmatic reasons. What's the point in learning Yiddish in a Slavic country? Wondered a Jewish respondent from Volhynia, who in the early 1930s was taught by his parents in a Ukrainian school despite the Jewishization policy. In some Ukrainian localities in the mid-1920s, Yiddish language schools served only 15% of ethnic Jewish children. Similarly, in the MSSR, parents of Jewish nationality opposed schooling in their mother tongue in large numbers. groups of parents petitioned the competent bodies contending against the authorities' decision to force their children to attend a Jewish school. Despite resistance, the proportion of Jewish children attending Jewish schools in the USSR rose from 42 in 1924-25 to 55 in 1926-27. So a similar increase was recorded also in Belarus during the same period. As in the case of Ukrainization and Moldovanization policies, the Jewishization of schools experienced a sudden upsurge during the Cultural Revolution and a decline in the second half of the 1930s in the transformation of Soviet nationality policy. During the late 30s, the Soviet strategy of affirmative action gave way to the pragmatic priority of inter-ethnic cohabitation under the symbolic authority of the Russian people. I'm sorry, Alexandra, how much time do I have? Till the well, I will move to
maybe 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I also think so.
Okay,
just a little bit more.
Well, just a few words about what I call organic bilingualism. Well, as I said, alluded earlier, the Polish and Romanian authorities promoted official bilingualism in the border areas, for example, by replacing Ukrainian or Belarusian schools with so-called utraquist or bilingual schools, following an established tradition in the Habsburg Empire. As in other border provinces, for example, in the Flemish regions of Belgium of 1918, bilingualism was imposed as a solution for integrating regional minorities into the language of the national center. Well, instead, the titular population had to reproduce the national monolingualism. In contrast to the policy of the nationalizing states to establish a regime of diglossia through official bilingualism, the reality on the ground in many areas of these border regions has been a type of organic bilingualism. As several studies suggest, the actions of nationalist activists, schools, and other state institutions in the nationalizing states aimed at imposing on the local populations in the border regions a clear choice of a single ethnic and linguistic identity. The response of these mixed populations to nationalization policies was, on the contrary, to further cultivate their cultural ambivalence and hybridity. In Eastern Galicia and Western Volhynia, several radiolect and dialect variations circulated. Well, in several Ukrainian regions, various hybrid linguistic formations, generically called surjik, were widely practiced, featuring a mixture of idioms, mainly from Ukrainian, Russians, but also Polish, depending on the region. Similarly, Trasianka, a mixture of Belarusian and Russian, was spoken in present-day Belarus. These regional idioms, which have shown their vitality to this day, being spoken by a large population in today's Ukraine and Belarus, have been consistently stigmatized by the guardians of purist conceptions of national languages. Trasianka and Surjik have also been contested on social grounds, with speakers of these languages perceived as representatives of the uneducated popular classes. The language spoken So the language spoken by Bessarabian peasants, which they called Moldovan, was described by visitors from the Old Kingdom as the Romanian language with an archaic expressiveness. Some observers considered it a purer language than the Romanian spoken in the kingdom, in the Old Kingdom, enriched with modern neologisms. Others observers regretted the use of Russian words and expressions in Bessarabian speech. Romanian-speaking Bessarabians called it a simple language, or of the ordinary people, to highlight its popular character. However, in Bessarabia, no phenomenon was comparable to that of Surzhyk or Trasianka in the Ukrainian and Belarusian regions. Traditional lifestyle and relations of rural communities, both minority and titular ethnic groups have responded not only through conformity, but also resistance, most often passive through non-participation, but also active and assertive via petitioning and protesting. Between accommodation and resistance to nationalization, rural communities responded according to their estimates of costs and benefits, not only pragmatic, but also social, not only on pragmatic ground, but also on social, symbolic, and cultural. Existing data suggests that resistance to schooling was lower among populations previously exposed to extensive mass schooling. Also, people resisted more school education in another language than in their literary mother tongue. One of the reasons for the regional differences in attendance of schools teaching in the standard mother tongue could be related to the intensity and spread of ethno-national identification among the groups concerned in the interwar period and before the First World War, for instance, Eastern Galician Ukrainians. I anticipate 3 reasons rural populations in the border regions resisted nationalizing policies, here through schooling. Most and foremost, practical rationality. Secondly, identifications and loyalties, and 3, social bonding. As suggested in this section some families and communities resisted nationalization through schooling for practical reasons, either because they preferred education in another language, considered more forward-looking, or needed children for household work. In Romania and Poland, Ukrainian communities sabotaged Romanian or Polish schools for reasons of loyalties and identifications that conflicted with Romanian or Polish nationalization programs, demanding schools in Ukrainian or another language. Finally, some families and communities boycotted school education because they felt that school alienated children from the traditional way of life of the community of origin, predisposing graduates to social and geographical mobility. Yeah, and this is really it.
Okay. So thank you very much, Petru. And we immediately switch to Nicolae about for the talk about the Concordat in Romania.
Yes, thank you. I'm sharing now the screen. Okay, so you can
Yes.
you can see the full screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm now going to speak about the Concordat that Romania concluded with the Holy See, and I will try to contemplate this issue from 3 perspectives. One that involves churches, mainly the Romanian Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Catholic Church, just to make sure that that I make clear my point. Catholic Church, in this case, has two rites: the Roman rite, the Latin rite, and the Greek or Oriental rite, which is the Greek Catholic Church. The second point that I want to make is the impact that the Concordat had upon the nation building. And finally, the third point is the legal controversies that the Concordat implied in the Romanian legal system. So the situation of churches, the situation of nation building, and the situation of the law are three perspectives that we have to have in mind when we try to assess and to understand the Concordat and its impact upon the Romania during this time. But there is one more thing that we have to keep in mind: is the Concordat itself is hard to define. So this is another complication to our discussion. Now I'm going to make just an overview of my presentation. The first problem that I want to stress is the definition of the Concordat. Then I will sketch a history of the Concordat, and I will stress that in 19th century, two types of Concordat are to be seen. The third point in my presentation is to make an overview of the Concordats that were concluded in Europe after the First World War. The Concordat with Romania, a short history, reactions, and legal controversies, and case studies. I will focus only on the Iosif Frolo-Ionescu debate in Cuvântul, and I will just say some few words about the issue of Jews' conversion to Roman Catholicism during the Holocaust. As this research is in progress, I will also be happy to share with you a paper that I finished, a draft that I have finished yesterday, and I will share with you. Perhaps I will send first to Alexandra, and then Alexandra will share to you, or if I get your email addresses, I can send you directly. It's a paper that works on the first case study. So the debate between Iosif Frolo and Ionescu in Cuvântul is very important, this debate. And the main objection that I want to make is that the current research does not stress the fact that this debate took place in the shadow of the Concordat. So it's unlikely that we had this debate without the Concordat 1 year before. So now back to the problem of definition. So the defining a Concordat is not an easy task. Some especially the political science approach stress the fact that the Concordat is an agreement, only an agreement between, so no further qualification, only an agreement between the ecclesiastical and the civil powers. So it is more like, how is it called in law, a contract, and a contract in which the duties and the rights, mutual duties and rights are clearly stipulated. In other more, let's say, general definition, a Concordat is a pact, a force in international law. This is a general definition. Another way to define the Concordat, this time from the perspective of the more canon law. The Concordat is a bilateral religious convention with international character. The Catholics tend to define the Concordat as a law, which has a twofold nature, ecclesiastical and civil, because it deals with purely ecclesiastical matters, but also with civil matters such as properties and property rights and other issues. So if we try to find a common denominator to all these definitions, we see that a Concordat involves two parties, the church and the state. The Catholic Church and the state. Another common denominator is the fact that the Concordat stipulates rights and duties. And the main problem here is how onerous are these rights and duties? Which party is winning in this agreement, the church or the state? And the critics of the Concordat claim that sometimes the state is the church is the institution that wins this in this agreement. So to conclude this point, we can say that the Concordat is a treaty, a bilateral accord. It's a diplomatic agreement, and a legal and ecclesiastical instrument. All these three qualifications, definitions are important for our discussion, because all three are brought into discussion when debating the Concordat. Now I am going to move forward to stress that in the 19th century there are two main types of Concordat. Sorry, okay. So the first Concordat was concluded in the 12th century, and this Concordat became a model for further similar agreements. The first type that I want to point out here is the Concordat concluded between France and Pope Pius VII. And this Concordat is important because it gives more weight to the state than to the church. In relation with the church, the state retains some powers that put the state in a stronger position. Whereas the second type of the Concordat is the one concluded about 50 years later between the Habsburg Emperor and the Pope Pius IX. And here the situation is the reverse. The church retains more powers in relation to the state, namely the Habsburg Empire at that time. And these two types of Concordat are very important because the discussion in Romania focused on these matters, and stressing the fact that the Concordat is even worse. The Concordat that Romania concluded with the Holy See in 1927, 1929, it was worse than the Concordat that the Habsburg Empire concluded with the Holy See in mid-19th century. So this is the position of the critics, and at stake was the issue of sovereignty. The Concordat was seen as a means to threaten and to diminish the sovereignty of the state. That was the basic, the basic of criticism. Now an overview of the Concordats that were concluded in Europe after the First World War. We have here Poland, Lithuania, Italy, which was very important, Romania, Germany, Yugoslavia. It's very interesting to, if we, from this list, if we try to make a comparative perspective, it's very interesting and very useful to take three cases: Romania, Yugoslavia, and Bulgaria. Bulgaria, no Concordat. Yugoslavia signed one and ratified and denunciated in 1 year later, whereas Romania signed, ratified, and denounced unilaterally by the communist regime, but much later. And it was not the, let's say, the orthodox state. What I'm now saying is an exaggeration. So it was not the the state to support the dominant religion, the dominant confession, but it was the atheist state to denounce this concordat, namely the communist regime, which is very, very interesting. So we have three cases, three cases that could and of course both all three are located in the same region, which makes even more interesting. Just to make more clear the point, I put here that according to the 1930 census, in Romania, about 70% were Orthodox, 8% Greek Catholic, about 7% Roman Catholics. Whereas in Yugoslavia, the census from 1921, about 50% were Orthodox, 40 Roman Catholic, and so that was the most the biggest figures of this census. We noticed that there were no Greek Catholic, and the Greek Catholic was very important minority in Transylvania, and these Greek Catholic were put in a very difficult position by the Concordat, and we will see why. Now I'm going to, because I have anticipated, and now I'll move forward to making a short history of the Concordat with Romania. The first discussions about concluding signing a Concordat started in 1921. Soon after the diplomatic relations between Romania, the Greater Romania, and the Holy See were opened. In 1921 was sent a second draft of the Concordat. In 1924, a third draft, which was the first two drafts were not agreed, were rejected. And in 1924, a third attempt to sign the Concordat. This timing is very relevant because in 1923, a new constitution was enacted. And in 1925, a law that regulated the statute of the status of the Romanian Orthodox Church was passed. And in 1927, King Ferdinand's health was deteriorating, and at the end he died. This is the context that we have to keep in mind for understanding the signing of the Concordat, which took place in 1927. It's very important because there are rumors that claim that if the Concordat was signed, was because the King Ferdinand pushed this document because he was about to die. He felt this, and because he was a Catholic, Roman Catholic king in a majority, in a dominant Orthodox country, the Pope did not excommunicate him. So the Pope did not want to give the communion, and he wanted the communion. And but these are and these rumors actually are not just rumors, are mentioned in many personal diaries and in the press, and because it's very very hard to understand why, despite the huge rejection, at the end the Concordat was signed. So it happened very very fast, and that was that it remains today. There is an open question why the Concordat was signed so fast. And 2 years later, in 1929, the parliament ratified the Concordat, and two points I want to make about the ratification. The ratification, almost all parties voted to ratify the Concordat. So it was like a more or less political consensus in the parliament. Interestingly, the ones that opposed to the Concordat were the Hungarian Catholics in Transylvania. And this is even more interesting because if the Concordat was criticized, was for the fact that in Transylvania the Roman Catholics were Hungarian, ethnical Hungarians in their majority, and this was a way to see, look, they have a certain autonomy, and they will push the irredentist discourse forward, and so on. So the Concordat was seen as a means to strengthen the irredentist perspective in the irredentist discourse in the political Romania, and so that's the two. And the second point that I want to make is that the ones that promulgated the end the Concordat were the members of the Regency, among them the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church, and the Orthodox Church was opposed to this document, and this created a difficulty for the Orthodox Church, because on the one hand, the majority of synod of bishops pronounced against the Concordat, and all the time claimed its abolishment, whereas the Patriarch was one of the three that promulgated, because the king was dead at that time, and his son was young, and there was a regency of three people, of three men. So that's the background of enforcing the Concordat. After this, there were several attempts to denounce it. The most important was in 1932, when a draft law was submitted to the Chamber of Deputies by the 27 members of the parliament, asking to denounce the Concordat. And this draft law was not enacted. Another attempt to denounce, to get out Romania of this agreement happened in the summer of 1937, when the Yugoslavian case was presented as a reason to follow their example, and this represented also a new boost in the far-right press to denounce the Concordat, because a very important question in studying the Concordat is how this legal document had the effect of strengthening the radical nationalist discourse in Romania, because there is this hypothesis: if many of the clergy, lower clergy especially, were oriented towards fascist camp, it was indirectly because of the Concordat, and it is an open question. A third point that I want to make is the demands of the Jews to convert to Roman Catholicism in 1942, 1943. Just I want to explain a little bit this point. In 1940, the government, which was ruled by Ion Antonescu, the dictator of that time of Romania, decreed through a decree law that Jews are not allowed to convert to Christianity and to Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Greek Catholic, so to Christianity. This decree law modified the general law on religious denominations. In 1942, 1943, many of the Jews that were already deported in Transnistria, but not only them, attempted to convert to Roman Catholicism, to the Roman Catholic rite of the Catholic Church in Romania. And they were not allowed because they said, the authorities said, there is this law forbidding the Jews to convert to Christianity. However, they claimed, and the Apostolic Nuncio Andrea Casulo played a central role in this. They claim that it is the Concordat that grants them certain autonomy, and the state should not interfere with their right to convert. And this was a very important discussion. It was discussed even in the Council of the Ministers. So it was an important problem that attracted the attention of the Council of Ministers. Of course, according to the minutes of the meetings, Ion Antonescu said that for him is not important because a Jew remains a Jew, whatever Christian, whatever religion he or she has. But the discussion is very important, and the legal stance of this point. And of course, in 1948, the Concordat was unilaterally denounced by the communist Romanian government, which was led by Petru Groza. So this was the end of the story of the Concordat, because after the communism in 1989, after the communist after the end of the communist regime in Romania, there were some attempts to reinforce the Concordat, but they were not. They did not succeed. And instead, a new law on the religious domination was passed, and the statement was that the law on the religious denominations is enough to regulate the whole religious cults in Romania. And this was very different from the 1928, when the critics of the Concordat said, why should we ratify the Concordat if we have a law regulating the religious denominations? Is not, let's say, a meta-legal instrument in this case, or how should I put, a superposition of laws with all these problems that arise? These are questions that were put at that time. But what is important is that in after 1989, after the communism, apparently the authorities learned the lesson of the interwar Romania, and they said, no Concordat, we have a law regulating the religious denominations, and that's enough. Now I will move forward to sketch the reactions from the Orthodox Church with regard to the Concordat, and the reactions were mainly intellectual, let's say, because there were books, articles that were produced during the 20s, and I identified several waves. The first wave consisted in 8 books, and this first wave corresponds to the negotiations of the 3 drafts. I listed them. I will just pass forward. The second wave corresponds to this moment of signing the Concordat. The third wave corresponds to the moment of ratifying the Concordat. And there were other books that were published afterwards. Now I'll just have a short look on the legal controversies. Some things I have already said, but now I will make them more clear. The Concordat with Romania posed some legal controversies. 3 are of very huge importance. Three of them are very important. The first one is the legal controversy implied by the Constitution of Romania. Because of the 22nd article states that the Romanian state guarantees all religions equal freedom and protection because their exercise does not prejudice public order, morality, and the laws of organization of the state. And the same article stipulates that the relations between the different cults and the council will be established by law. So the Constitution asks the legislator to enact a special law on religious denominations. After the Constitution, in 1922, the Concordat was signed in 1927. After signing the Concordat, the law on cults was passed. And in this law, we see that the first article is a reproduction of the constitutional article that I have just quoted. The seventh article stipulates that no cult can have relations of dependence with any authority or ecclesiastical organization abroad, apart from those imposed by dogmatic and juridical canonical principles. So we have here if you read this legal stipulation, we have the rule that no dependence on a foreign authority, and the exception. So in the same article, we have the exception, apart from those imposed by dogmatic and juridical canonical principles. Of course, this was perceived by the critics of the Concordat as preparing the way for the ratification of the Concordat. So, and moreover, was seen by the critics as a way to adapt a state law, to a legal instrument, diplomatic understanding. It was a way to, because in their reasoning, a law enacted by the state is much more important than a mere diplomatic agreement, as was defined by the Concordat. And they say why? They said, why should the state? What is the sovereignty of the state that enact laws based not on its own interest, but on its agreements, diplomatic agreements? So that was the substance of a criticism. And the second paragraph, the same article stipulates that relations between the state and the Catholic cult, the only one in the country with such dependence, may be established by a special agreement, which will be submitted to the legislative bodies for approval. So this paragraph put the main problem. So some questions arise from this perspective. One question is that, was the Concordat needed in the conditions of the 1923 Constitution? Did the Concordat confer to the Catholic Church a special status within the state? This is another question. Another question: did the Concordat confer privileges to the Catholic Church as compared to other religious cults, most notably with the Romanian Orthodox Church? Did the Concordat influence the elaboration of the general law on cults? Did the Concordat contradict the Constitution? So these questions actually could drive a very interesting research from a legal perspective, very interesting research of the Concordat from a legal perspective. I will finish with this case study. It's about a debate that involved Ionescu and Iosif Frollo. Ionescu was professor of philosophy, was the owner of the newspaper Cuvântul, the Word, was the mentor of the famous generation that included Mircea Eliade, Emil Cioran, and other people. Whereas Iosif Frollo was a professor of foreign languages. Naionescu was Orthodox, Iosif Frollo was Roman Catholic. Naionescu was to become 3 years later the ideologue of the Iron Guard, which was the fascist movement of Romania, and an ideologue of the far right, one far right group, because far right included many other groups and not only the fascist Iron Guard. Iosif Frollo was as I said, Roman Catholic, but it's very interesting that Iosif Frollo had some fascist sympathies too. And I think he was one of the very, very few Roman Catholics to have some nationalist fascist sympathies, which makes the discussion even more interesting. But for the sources for his engagement are not so so telling, are not so available, so more research is to be done. The central question of the debate was this one: what is to be good Romanian? And the question had involved the relation between confession and ethnicity, because Naionescu claimed that a Catholic can be a good Romanian, but a Catholic can never be a Romanian, a genuine Romanian. Whereas Iosif Frollo said, okay, everyone can be Romanian, but not everyone can be good Romanian. So the positions were reversed. And what is more important is that for Naionescu, the religious and the religious affiliation and ethnicity were something given by history, he had a naturalistic conception, whereas Iosif Frollo had a voluntaristic conception. He said, if I want to become a Romanian, then I will become a Romanian. If I want to become Catholic, I will become Catholic. So there were two philosophical perspectives, philosophical conceptions opposing the Naionescu's conception, which was deterministic, naturalistic, and Iosif Frollo's conception, which was voluntaristic. The debate had ramifications in the press. Many other people were involved in this debate. As span of time, the debate took place between late October and mid-December. It consisted in 18 articles, and as I said, the positions were clearly defined at the very end of the debate. According to Iosif Frollo, the religion does not make you good Romanian. It finds you Romanian, it makes you good Romanian. Whereas Naionescu claims that ethnically and spiritually speaking, to be good Romanian is less than being Romanian. And good Romanian is very ambiguous notion. This debate is relevant because had an impact, a strong impact upon the public discourse of the nationalist camp, because to be Romanian means to be Orthodox. However, there is a problem in this discussion, and the problem concerned the conversion to Orthodoxy. Because you may ask, what was the position of the Orthodox Church? If to be Romanian means to be Orthodox, theoretically is a position that should attract the enthusiasm and the support of the Orthodox Church, which was not the case. If we try to analyze the position of the Orthodox Church, not many sources are available because the archives are pretty closed. I mean, are inaccessible, at least for this period of time. And one way to explore but not with definitive conclusions. One way to explore is to research the official press of the Romanian Orthodox Church, which means the press of the eparchies of the Romanian Orthodox Church, which were about 18 publications at that time. And I had a look on in this during this time, and they did not discuss and they did not refer to this debate, with one exception, which was very important, the exception from Archbishop of Sibiu, which was chaired by the Metropolitan Nicolae Bălan, and the one to intervene in the debate was Dumitru Stăniloae, the future theologian and priest. Of course, Dumitru Stăniloae sided in this debate with Naionescu, although he had his own conceptions in this debate. So it was not a mere support. It was, let's say, a critical reading of Naionescu's. Many things are to be said here. That's why I would like to share with you the paper that I have just finished yesterday. And if you have comments, whatever comments, criticism, and I will be very happy to have them. And now I'm back to there is one more issue that brought forward this debate, the distinction between orthodoxy and orthodoxism, because orthodoxism was the core of the religious nationalism that was to flourish during the 30s. And of course, this debate created a huge identity problem for Greek Catholic Church. They were ethnical Romanians, and moreover, they were responsible for creating liberating the emancipatory nationalism of the 19th century in Transylvania. And at the same time, they were considered as Eastern Catholic Rite. So after this debate, the Greek Catholic did not have a share to pure and genuine Romanianness. They were just Catholic, and their contribution to liberating the Romanians during the 19th century was not recorded at that time. So that was the identity problem that posed. And I want to present this debate as a follow-up of the Concordat, the first follow-up of the Concordat, and I will argue. I argued in my paper about this, because by now this debate is in every book is mentioned, because it's very important, but it was not presented as a follow-up of the Concordat, and that's why we don't have a first understanding why, and the first reply to the question why many of the Orthodox clergy oriented sided with the radical nationalist camp during the 30s, especially the fascist legion. And this is the list of the articles, and with this list I will be done. Thank you very much.
To the speakers of today, to Petru and Nicolae.
Thank you.
I hope that you visit us once again when we continue with this talk series. The next time is going to be on 17th May with Petar Dobrev from the Center of Advanced Studies Sofia about the kulaks in Bulgaria in 1944. That is in early communism, and Lovro Kralj, the Holocaust in Southeastern Europe in comparative perspective.